Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 2023 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off their mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Items for Council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held on 12 December 2023. That brings us to item 4, which is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies. I haven't received any apologies for this evening. And item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, of which there is nil this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest, and I'll read out the declarations that I've already received. The first is a declaration by Councillor Nick Coveney on item 10.2.1. It's an impartiality interest as follows. Like I did with most business owners on Angelo Street and Men's Street during my election campaign, I briefly met with the owners of Next Door. Similarly, like I have with most cafes and restaurants on Angelo Street and Men's Street, I've previously eaten at Next Door. I've received a declaration from Councillor Hayley Prendeville for item 10.3.1. It's an impartiality interest as follows. Some of the staff at Wesley College are known to me. I've received a declaration from Councillor Bronwyn Moore on item 10.3.1. It's an impartiality interest as follows. My son attends Wesley College. Councillor Mary Choi has declared an impartiality interest on item 10.3.1 as my husband is a Wesley College old boy and our sons attend Wesley College. And I've also received an impartiality interest declaration from Councillor Hayley Prendeville on item 10.4.1 as I have a family member who is a member of Collier Park Golf Course. Councillors, does anyone else have any declarations of interest? Councillor Navard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I have one for 10.2.1, the Next Door facility. My interest is impartial and it relates to some of the local regular customers of the local businesses in the vicinity of 79 Angelo Street, and some of the traders are known to me. I undertake to vote in accordance with the interests of the entire city.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. And another one?
Yes, I've got another one for 10.4.1, the tender for the golf course management services. And I know a number of golfers and active lobbyists who use Collier Park Golf Course or have campaigned in the interests of the golf course. This course is in my ward as well, for which I have been elected, but I undertake to vote in accordance with the interests of the entire city.
Thank you, Councillor Navard, and I presume that's an impartiality interest? Thank you. Councillors, any further declarations of interest this evening? No. Okay. In that case, we'll move on to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations. And this evening we have 5 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes each to address council. I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Gavin Olsen of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation on item 10.2.1. Welcome, Mr. Olsen. The microphone is yours and we look forward to your deputation.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Greg Milner, CEO Mike Bradford, Manager Governance Tony Fryer, members of council, officers and members of the public. My name is Gavin Olsen. I am the owner and operator of Olsen Butchers and Next Door Restaurant, located on Angelo Street in South Perth. I would like to speak for the approval of the city's first parklet. A parklet is a space that occupies existing car bays, a reuse of the area for the community and businesses, a place for rest and enjoyment during the day and night. The semi-permanent structure is designed and built locally to engineer specifications, ensuring its safety and longevity. The parklet will be occupied by Olsen Butchers and Next Door during operating hours. It is also available to the community outside of operating hours. Next Door and Olsen Butchers staff will be tasked with keeping the parklet neat, clean and tidy 7 days per week. The area will be licensed during Next Door operating hours and will be classed as an extended trading area, meaning it will be governed by the same liquor licence that we currently hold. It will not affect our capacity as we are currently licensed for 120 people. We have 76 seats available throughout the venue. With the addition of the parklet will take us to 96 seats and the additional space for standing guests. An approved manager is on site at all times and the area will be monitored under the same code of conduct as our venue. Additional CCTV will be installed to monitor the entire parklet. Bench seating around the outside of the parklet is permanent, with the addition of tables and chairs during operating hours. The parklet will be covered by public liability insurance. We'll have bollards installed at either end, be made of a steel frame construction, including a 900mm balustrading around all outside edges, have adequate lighting to the area, outdoor ceiling fans to keep the area cool during summer, be a non-smoking area, a fully covered roof to offer shade, and non-slip composite floor decking to cover the floor. The parklet will be completely built off-site as 2 modular units. The units will be lifted into place using a HIAB. Should Angelo Street need to be resurfaced, the parklet can be removed with 28 days notice and repositioned once work has been completed. Early in the new year, Olsen Butchers will be expanding its range to include hot pies, sausage rolls and ready-to-eat food items. This parklet will offer those customers a place to sit and enjoy their food, perhaps whilst reading a newspaper purchased from the Vaucluse News Agency. Parklets increase the walkability of urban retail areas. Multiple studies, both here in Australia and around the world, have indicated that over 70% of patrons to these areas are likely to stay longer when these amenities are in place. The 2023 Australian Livability Census concluded Subiaco as the most livable city. Vincent and Cambridge also being inside the top 25 most livable cities in Australia. All of these city council areas successfully operate with parklets in place on urban retail streets. Alfresco dining at Next Door has been a very popular place for guests, and increasing the availability of seats outside and also opening up the area to the public will be a benefit. The Acrod parking bay located on Angelo Street is no longer to specification and needs to be lengthened by 1.1 metres. The design of the parklet accommodates those changes. Given the fact that the Acrod bay needs to be lengthened by 1.1 metres, we would be losing 1 car bay to accommodate this either way. Therefore, the proposed parklet on Angelo Street is really only taking the space of 1 car bay. In addition, the city will save costs involved with repositioning the remaining 5 bays and repositioning the parking timers once the Acrod bay has been lengthened. Opening up this space for guests and the community outweighs any possible loss of 1 parking bay. This parklet will not define the success of my business. The goal here is to create a more vibrant street with options for the community, and I'm willing to work with the council on any feedback recommendations or initiatives that encourage people to walk through our retail strip. I've witnessed the street over the last 20 years of business with my father in South Perth change from what was a financial-based street with multiple banks and business operations to a family-friendly mix of retail, medical, groceries, markets and food and beverage. Into the future, I envisage a street with additional nighttime food and beverage options for the community, and I hope that by increasing the walkability of Angelo Street, we can encourage those operators to the area. The street has more visitors by foot, cycle and electric mobility than ever before. With the addition of the parklet, we can increase the number of people using Angelo Street, and those people can linger longer. Therefore, more opportunity for businesses and customers on Angelo Street. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation, Mr Olsen. I'll get you just to stay seated just for a moment because I'm about to ask the councillors if they have any questions for you. Elected members, do we have any questions for Mr Olsen this evening? We do not. Thank you again for your deputation. I'd now like to invite Dr Michael Pritchard of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome, Dr Pritchard. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to hearing your deputation.
Thank you, Mr Milner, Mr Bradford, members of council. So the objection is not absolute. It's a matter of detail. The basis of the officer recommendation that the council approves an allocation of funds for a sports spaces feasibility study is a single use investigation. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this motion. In view of the limited notice period, I should apologise in advance if I have omitted something or if there are any errors in my reading of the documentation, but thank current and former councillors for their advice on the matter and council for allowing this submission. So while a feasibility study on the use of Elm Street end of St James Mitchell Park has merit, so far there is limited transparency in the proposal. Obviously the outcome of the feasibility study is not known in advance. However, if it is limited to the answering of one question, namely sports facilities, you'll get the answer you're looking for. We noted that Wesley College used that park, part of the park for a short period for junior school sports soon after we moved into the area in 1991, and then it dissipated. Apart from a bit of history, there seems to be no a priori reason that we could find or justification for exclusive use of that part of South Perth foreshore for school team sport, other than an intention in the strategic plan. Recent sporting usage of strategic foreshore plan node 10, Elm Street end of the park, mostly has been casual, ad hoc, public access cycling, rollerblading, walking, kite flying, jogging, picnic related mini sporting activities such as badminton, social cricket and other sports, or so we have observed. We agree that some sporting activity in public space, open spaces has merit. However, the devil's in the detail. For example, it is in no interest to be hitting a golf ball with a 3-iron in a public space. Hence the feasibility study. The background statement indicates the City of South Perth has been in long-term negotiation with Wesley College since 2012, maybe longer. And while the offer by Wesley to make a financial contribution to development of that part of the park, fronting Swan View and Lamb, is commendable, no financial contribution comes without strings attached. In other words, the financial contribution for a specific purpose implies that there would be long-term lock-up of spaces for private purposes. Some of the sporting activities would be incompatible with current usage. For example, playing team cricket would imply a zone of exclusion for both humans and dogs, or face the risk of injury, similar to golf. Dogs off leash would at least make soccer interesting. Fencing a large area for private sport would, in my view, be a disaster. Certain sporting activities should be compatible with other uses, but it all depends upon what those sports and uses are. One of the arguments put forward to somewhat exclusive use of the part of the park for sports spaces is that it has been described as a vast expanse of lawn, predominantly used used for dog walking and off-leash exercising, active recreation and pursuits, and passing pedestrian and cyclist traffic. The description of this part of the Sir James Mitchell Park as very boggy is true in winter, but reflects a view that is hardly flattering. The strategic plan's description of the area in question as underutilised reflects lack of development for public usage compared with western sections of the foreshore, rather than an intrinsic characteristic that favours sport. If you like, it's a somewhat neglected part of South Perth foreshore, at least so far. This part of the park abuts a neighbouring region. The language regarding lack of connection with the town of Victoria Park is a perspective that ignores exercise through traffic, that is cyclists, joggers, etc., and the occasional event that binds the two, for example, Australia Day, and turning the foreshore into a car park for the adjacent four-wheel drive exhibition, Victoria Park. I've got a copy for illustration purposes. I'm not sure how much money exchanged hands for the car park. I hope a lot, but doubt that it is optimal use of prime riverfront lands for car parking. One of the connections to Victoria Park is the susceptibility to inundation. Again, a figure that is more for photographic purposes. Attempts to fix that problem in the past, as I understand it, by under-turf drainage have not worked that well. Solutions to this problem are likely to be very expensive, and perhaps there's a better use of funds than the equivalent of what was performed on the Wacker. The Elm Street end of the park is useful for those who use it, but probably underdeveloped relative to its potential. There may be alternative visions for development with at least equal merit and broader appeal, and I suspect that there are plenty of stakeholders who are happy to contribute. So in summary, the proposal to fund data collection and analysis is fine if it is for the right purpose, but the proposal should be non-prejudicial, non-binding, and open to broader input. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation, Dr. Pritchard. Councillors, do we have any questions for Dr. Pritchard about his deputation this evening? Looks like no questions. Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Mr. Joseph Treacy of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome, Mr. Treacy. I hope I've pronounced your surname correctly. We look forward to your deputation.
As long as it's not a check, I don't mind. Yeah. Tracy is how it's said. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors and staff and fellow ratepayers. As the Mayor said, I'm here to object to or register my objection to the co-funding feasibility study. In my view, the study is primarily for the benefit of Wesley College, and that being the case, they should bear the cost, not the ratepayers. They are effectively getting ratepayers to cover the cost of an option for which there will be significant commercial benefit to Wesley. That is the ability to take on more students by having access to more playing grounds. Grounds which are currently controlled by the council. The area in question is over my back fence. There's my conflict. And it's very passive and it's very enjoyable to watch dog walkers, kite flyers, joggers. We had 100 BMW enthusiasts park their bikes there on Sunday morning. The area in question is also distant from the college, and if this was to go ahead, would require transport to and from the college, leading to a significant increase in traffic flow, the cost and mitigation of which would again fall to ratepayers and not the college. It would also affect the passive nature of the area. The nominal cost of $50,000 is, in my view, not enough money to adequately assess the risks or potential of that area, and I suspect if it is limited to $50,000, you're going to end up with a feasibility which is of not much use to the council when it comes to making a further commitment or decision. And there's nothing in here in the proposal that limits this feasibility cost rolling on if it turns out that you need to spend more money to get a proper or arrive at a proper report. The report by the council staff emphasises the shortage of cricket pitches in the South Perth Council, but this proposal will only allow for the Wesley students, in effect, to use the pitch, because the reality is that cricket fixtures for both Wesley and the South Perth Cricket Club are at the same time, and two groups cannot use the same facility. And the way this is placed, Wesley will take priority. So the argument about the increase in pitches, in cricket pitches, is really irrelevant. And the same logic would also apply to soccer and to football, because junior sport is almost inevitably played at the same time across all codes. As the previous speaker said, the land currently is passive recreation, walking of dogs, etc. And a sports oval is really incompatible with dogs. Does this mean that you would have to fence it off to keep the dogs out of the cricket pitch, the soccer pitch, or the football oval? That is something that would have to be addressed, and I don't think that would go over particularly well. The area bordered by Alum and Taylor Streets would seem, although outside of the South Perth Shire, would appear to be a more sensible location for the venue, given it has toilet facilities, it's already used for public events, and is distant from housing. And, you know, perhaps, and I don't know, but perhaps Wesley should more look at, instead of being South Perth, look at areas around here where there is a better fit than where they're proposing currently. I'm not opposed to alternative uses of the foreshore. However, the current proposal doesn't seem to benefit ratepayers and seems to be a better deal, weighted for a better deal to Wesley than it does to South Perth. And the ratepayers that I have spoken to were also suspicious of the timing that this agenda item appeared on a Friday afternoon without any prior warning or consultation, and at a time when people's attention is turning to Christmas. And I'm sure this is just the way things happen, but perhaps the council could see how this timing could be misinterpreted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you for your deputation. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Tracy? No. Thank you very much for your... Oh, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Sorry, Mr Tracy, we do have a question.
Thank you very much for your deputation, Mr Tracy. I just have a couple of questions. Obviously, you've identified that $50,000 may not be suitable to undertake the feasibility studies. Obviously, it's been indicated that the land does get quite boggy there at points in time, so geological and hydrological concerns are an issue. Do you have any indication as to what might be a reasonable cost to undertake this sort of a study at all?
Look, by training, I'm a geologist, and but I'm not a hydrogeologist, and that's an engineering geology issue. But my experience of these sort of things is that that would be an inadequate estimate. I would think that it would probably be twice that. You might be getting to the point where you'd get a report that you might have, that you could rely on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr Tracy. And I have a second question. You raised the point with regard to the primary beneficiary of this potential outcome being Wesley College, and therefore the total cost of feasibility to be incurred by them. Do you have a view as to whether, if the total cost for feasibility studies was incurred by the city, it might be a bit more impartial with regard to other potential users of the same location and field?
I would think that would be more likely, yes. It'd be, given things that we've seen in independent consulting groups of late, I think you want to be really sure of the impartiality of whomever runs your feasibility.
Thank you, Mr Tracy.
Councillors, any further questions for Mr Tracy this evening? No. Thank you again for your deputation.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Mr David Bassel of South Perth, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome, Mr Bassel. The microphone is yours. We look forward to your deputation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. My name is David Bassel. I live in Swanview Terrace, South Perth. So I'm back onto the area that we're talking about. It's proposed in, let me just try something different. Oh, there you are. It's proposed that an investigation feasibility study be undertaken in relation to establishing sporting grounds, change rooms, toilet blocks and cafes to cater for cricket fields, soccer pitches or hockey pitches, mainly and primarily for use by Wesley School Sports in the area of Sir James Mitchell Park abutting Elm Street. We oppose that development in this location for this purpose based on the following. The ground is unsuitable for playing sports. It's well known that during the winter time it floods and some people will tell you that it floods quite deeply, and particularly over at that end, the Elm Street end of the fields. Certainly, my neighbour who lives over there has said that the water comes up to their ankles quite often, and it takes a long time to dissipate. During other times, like for instance this period now where we're going into summer, the ground becomes very spongy and it's almost impossible to do anything on it apart from walking. The water table in this area is but a few inches below the surface. Without significant geotechnical works, including raising the surface height, it would be, it is an unplayable, it would be unplayable. Wesley have already tried to use these fields for sports within the last 15 years and found it too difficult to develop and maintain to play hockey and soccer. Keep in mind that I'm guessing a lot of these answers, well, their reasons because I'm not privy to what was said at the time. So they gave up trying to play hockey and soccer in that area. Also, there was a concrete artificial grass cricket pitch installed in the same sort of general proximity, which was hardly used and eventually removed because it was of no utility to the school. You keep in mind that the Wacker ground had a similar problem, and they've got the same sort of problem with a high water table. And they spent some tens of millions of dollars in geotechnical works to make it a first-class surface to play on. Now, I'm not saying it's going to cost exactly the same for down here for junior sports, but certainly it's going to be a significant cost. Any infrastructure work must be for the benefit of and accessible by the public. There once was a toilet block put in the vicinity of Elm Street car park, but it was removed due to a lot of unsavoury behaviour in that facility. If you look at other sports facilities in South Perth, both change rooms and toilets, generally you'll find are locked when organised sport is not being played. And I'm just wondering why this will be any different. Because we're talking about having facilities or putting facilities in that will be not just available to use by Wesley College, but also to be used by the general public. Wesley have proposed that their priority exclusive use of that area would be 27 hours per week, according to the table that was in the agenda notes. Now, if you look at what the possible usage hours are of that area, it actually comes out to 54 hours. So that means that the school wants exclusive use of that area for 50% of the time. And which will be allocated to Wesley exclusively. And all that's in prime time. So it's hard to get someone else to play some other sort of sport on those fields if Wesley has it from 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning and they want to play from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, it hardly makes any sense. And so why does it matter if Wesley has exclusive use of the facilities? Because some time ago, the land was compulsorily acquired by the state government, invested in the South Perth Roads Board for the purpose of the following public work. And I'm quoting here, for the purpose of the following public work, namely recreation grounds, free of all encumbrances. Facilities like cafes, it would be argued, are not recreation grounds. Furthermore, I believe that the foreshore land is reserved under the Metropolitan Region Scheme for Parks and Recreation and comes under the authority of the Swan River and Canning River Rivers Management Act. The land may be held freehold by the council, but its use is also not determined by, but its use is also determined by other authorities. If you look at the size of what is being proposed, if, for instance, Wesley go ahead and put soccer fields and a cricket pitch in, generally you'd put 2 soccer fields in, just as a general rule. You hardly ever see one soccer field by itself, and a cricket pitch, change rooms, and then you could have put car parking in to cater for that. Based on 200 car bays, if you look at the car park at the Boat Shed Cafe, it's approximately 200 car bays, and that's just the western part of the parking area. The land required, all up, would be of some 10 hectares as a guess. The lot of land that abuts Elm Street is approximately 5 hectares, so that's half of what would be required. Now, to give you an idea, that land, that first lot, goes from Elm Street to Heppingstone Street and from Lamb Street to the river. There's only one off the lease dog exercising area in this area that abuts Elm Street. Sports games and off the leash dogs won't work very well, I don't think. Whilst this is early days and the proposal is but a feasibility study, we believe that there are sufficient obstacles to develop the land proposed into sports fields, and we suggest that you shelve the process and use the money for something more deserving. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr Basil. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Basil this evening? No. Thank you very much for your deputation. I'd now like to invite Mr Peter Scott of Como, who is speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.4.1. Welcome, Mr Scott. We look forward to your deputation.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and good evening, everybody. Last Friday afternoon, one of my golf colleagues sent me a text message telling me that he was at the Collier Park Golf Course and that Club Links had just announced over the PA there that they'd been awarded the contract to manage the course for 21 years, and then they proceeded to buy everyone at the course a round of drinks. Hopefully the outcome is not a fait accompli, as there are a number of concerns that I believe need to be addressed before such a long-term commitment is agreed to. The concerns, I think, are firstly, a 21-year lease commits the city to a single privately owned company that A, could be sold to another company that potentially does not meet the city's standards of performance. Secondly, could become insolvent and therefore unable to meet the commitments of the contract. it could seek to extract a considerable return on investment, potentially at the expense of the golfing public. There's no mention that I can see of price control by the city. The second concern is a recommendation does not seem to recognise the potential for the operator to price gouge or maximise profit through practices that adversely impact the current users of that facility. For example, the operator could enter into arrangements that would see the current social club groups lose their existing long-standing tea times to the booking of corporate days that would render a more profitable outcome for the operator. Now, this has happened at the Maylands Golf Course, where existing groups have been told, no, I'm sorry, you can't play today because we've got a corporate group and we're going to make a lot of money out of this. So I think that's of concern. Thirdly, the city seems to be going down the path of advocating major changes to existing operating practices without providing ratepayers with enough information to enable them to critically scrutinise the business case for committing to such an extremely long-term contract. Presumably, this is being done in commercial in confidence, which is similar to what we saw in the RAF project. The next concern is that city officers estimate that they would need to spend approximately $15 million over the next 5 years to replace and improve assets at the Collier Park Golf Course. And this is ensuring it remains financially viable asset, and that's a quote. They have made such statements in the past, and when I've asked for details that supports that assertion, they've failed to provide the information. I seriously question the need to spend this amount of money to provide the golfing public with what they require. It seems these folk have not been consulted as to their expectations. This suggests that the proponents do not understand what golfers want. Apart from the need to resolve an issue with some roof leaks, which could be readily fixed by re-roofing the buildings, the existing facilities are quite adequate in the opinion of most golfers that I've spoken to, in fact, all the golfers I've spoken to. This is supported by the statement in the officer recommendation that Collier Park Golf Course, and I quote, is one of the most popular golf courses in the Perth metropolitan area, and I would agree with that statement. The fact that the golf course is currently providing a reported $800,000 per annum profit suggests that if the golf course is maintained to the current standard, it will continue to return this level of profit going forward. There is no demand for improved offering for golfers, and the existing city venues, in my opinion, offer adequate entertainment venues for the wider community. This is money that does not need to be spent. The last concern is there may well be a business case for further development of this facility. For example, a double-level driving range has been talked about for quite some time. But this isn't an essential improvement, but is one that would need to be supported by sound financial analysis that such a facility would provide an adequate return. So really putting a business case together that shows that it's actually worthwhile spending the money. The mini golf is a good example of a facility that was built without understanding the demand and has consequently been underperforming, in my opinion, since its construction. Councillors in this council approved a $2 million expenditure based on a 6-year payback. They were told by the council officers that the payback would be 6 years. Calculation of revenue and expense show that the payback is more like 11 years. But there does not seem to be any accountability for this error in judgment, and I'm left to wonder whether the investment decisions will be similarly wrong in result in underperformance. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Scott. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr. Scott this evening? No. Thank you very much for your deputation. Okay, that brings us to item 10, which is the draft December reports. And I'll now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft December reports. Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.2.1, proposed parklet next door and Alton Butchers, Angelo Street Road Reserve, abutting number 79 Angelo Street, South Perth. The purpose of this report is for council to consider a licence application for a parklet adjacent to next door restaurant and Alton Butchers. The parklet is proposed to be installed in the road reserve within 2 existing on-street parking bays outside of the businesses which are located at number 79 Angelo Street, South Perth. The City recommends that council issue a 12-month licence on a trial basis.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, I'm about to ask if you have any questions for the administration on this item this evening, but just a reminder that this is not your only opportunity to ask questions. If you have them, you can also ask questions offline. So with that, any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you. Why is the City recommending this parklet trial in the absence of a parklet policy and a parklet licence fee in the City's fees and charges schedule, as other neighbouring local governments appear to have in place for their parklet applications?
Who should I send that to? Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Choi. So the City is required to consider applications on their individual merits, and that includes relevant design considerations. We're required to consider the application in accordance with the provisions in the local law, given the application has been made, and the City or Council does not require a policy. Whilst they guide decision-making, a policy is not required to enable you to make the decision on the licence, given it's covered by the local law. The City is in the process of actually formulating amendments to the existing alfresco dining policy to include criteria that would otherwise be used to provide guidance on the assessment of parklets. So that would include things like materiality, design specifications, vehicle sight lines, impact on the road network and the like. And these considerations have been factored in the assessment of the application for the parklet.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Bard, I thought I saw your hand go up there.
Mr Mayor, the movable furniture of tables and chairs in the parklet is intended to be removed each night. Might the internal bench arrangements with the surrounding shelter therefore become an incentive for folks sleeping rough to use the facilities after restaurant closing hours? And would this become a negative impact in the shopping area overall?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There is the potential for people to use the parklet outside of trading hours. If there was antisocial behaviour, similar to any other antisocial behaviour throughout the city, we would consider that it should be directed towards the West Australian Police. There are a number of initiatives that the city has in terms of providing a safer community, and whether that be passive surveillance of spaces based on the design, CCTV, the use of the city's CCTV trailer, but we always encourage people to make reports to WA Police if there is instances of antisocial behaviour.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi, I saw your hand go up again.
Yes, thank you through the Chair to Director Shaw. As the City has not initiated the parklet trial, but rather the applicant has submitted an application for the parklet for their commercial benefit, why is the City not treating the application on commercial terms and has recommended a waiver of licence fees and alfresco dining fees for the parklet space for the 12-month period, when other local hospitality businesses have to pay fees?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of the fee for the parklet itself, the city's adopted fees and charges does not have provision for a fee specific to a parklet, and therefore council would not be able to charge a fee for the parklet itself. However, the fees and charges do have a fee applicable for alfresco dining. We have actually recommended that that fee be waived, given the parklet is consistent with the economic development plan itself. However, it is open for council to still apply and charge that fee.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Lavarde.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Because I've witnessed two near misses in two differing local government areas regarding wait staff or customers exiting a food outlet when a scooter rider was passing through, what preventative actions is the city able to apply to ensure the safety of the community of Angelo Street patrons travelling along or across the 1800 millimetre transit pathway, and taking into account all costs associated with the design, build, maintenance and approval for a parklet are the responsibility of the applicant.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the approved alfresco area adjacent to the business at the moment extends 1.2 metres from the back of the wall of the tenancy out into the footpath. And that then provides the 1.8 metre clear zone between the existing approved alfresco area and the parklet itself. So I would consider that that provides sufficient sight lines for people to see any other pedestrians or scooters riding along the footpath as people traverse the space into the parklet. However, arguably, people are already crossing that space to get into their vehicles as a car park. So in terms of what the city would otherwise be doing to mitigate that risk, we're not intending, if council approves the application, to delineate that space. However, if the applicant was encroaching into that 1.8 metre pedestrian clear zone, we can either enforce the requirements to bring it back into the approved areas, or we can revoke the licence if there's continual breaches and encroachment into that space.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, do we have any further questions? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you through the chair again to Director Shaw. I'm just wondering in terms of the neighbouring businesses, since the car bays in question or proposed for the parklet are also used by other local businesses, what their support or otherwise of this proposal has been through the public consultation period, please.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So there's actually no requirement under the local law for an applicant to obtain the support of local businesses prior to making an application for use of the road reserve. However, despite there not being a requirement to do so, the city has undertaken public consultation. Whilst we haven't identified the names of the submitters, the schedule of submissions, which is contained as an attachment, provides all of the feedback for council to consider. Some of those submissions have been received from nearby and adjacent businesses.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I noticed that the table and chair arrangements in the parklet picture show the chairs tucked into the tables and the tables are shown snug to the fixed bench seating. It seems entirely possible that in their use, patrons will need to pull the tables out to fit onto the fixed benches to allow for their knee room, and those using the individual chairs may well need to pull their chair into the 1800 millimetre transit pathway if they are a person of large stature. While this may only be an issue if the facility is almost entirely filled, does the city have any role in monitoring the enduring safety aspect of the transit pathway on the footpath?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Councillor Varden, through you, Mr Mayor. Similar to my previous response, it is open for the city to revoke the licence if there is encroachment beyond the approved licensed area. The city is not intending on regularly inspecting the licensed area to make sure chairs are tucked in and as per the approved licensed area. However, if there were complaints received that was occurring, we would certainly investigate.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Inherent in the concept of a 12-month trial is, I guess, the view that there would be some criteria to guide how we know whether it's been successful or not. And the report mentions there'll be a policy drawn up to, I guess, evaluate that. I guess my question is, by the end of the 12 months, will that policy be in place so council can assess whether it's been successful or not?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We're intending to present a policy to council for their consideration early next year. The policy itself wouldn't necessarily guide whether or not this proposal has been successful. And the reason being is that a policy would typically be used to create criteria in the assessment of the application, so to do with design parameters and the locational criteria and the like. For us to consider whether or not we would extend a licence, first of all, the applicant would need to give an indication as to whether they would like the licence extended beyond the 12-month period. So that would determine on the success that they perceive the parklet actually has. In terms of what we would consider, we would go out for public consultation to gauge community feedback on the impact that the parklet has had. And we also intend to undertake parking counts throughout the area during the period to see what impact the loss of those car parking bays is having on the businesses in the area.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Choi, this will be your fourth question. Do you have many questions beyond that?
As you do, Mr Mayor, but I understand that just before the meeting you did limit my questions to 4 questions. So I was going to ask, after asking my fourth question, if the rest of my questions that were provided on notice prior to the meeting could be included in the minutes, so as to not to take up more time, which is what I think your reason was for not going beyond 4 questions.
That's unusual. Ms Fry?
No, we don't include questions or answers in the notes that we take at briefings. It's just a general overview of the items that are discussed.
Perhaps I'll suggest this, Councillor Choi. Ask your fourth question. I understand that the questions that you've previously sent in have already been answered by email by Ms Shaw. If you like, you're very welcome to distribute those answers to the other elected members if you think they're relevant to the consideration by the elected members of this item. But if I understand there's 14 plus questions there, if everyone asks 14 questions at a forum like this, we'll never get through a meeting. So given that your questions have already been answered, by all means ask the fourth question, but perhaps we'll give someone else a go after that.
Thank you. So there appears to be some incongruence between the requirements set out under Clause 1G of the proposed licence conditions, that the parklet is to be accessible to the public at all times, with the applicant not having exclusive or uninterrupted use, coupled with the background reporting at page 7 of the agenda that states the parklet will provide alfresco dining opportunities for businesses, being plural, and permanent bench seating for the public. Against the applicant's expectations set out in their covering letter and the officer's reporting on pages 11 and 55 of the attachments, that the parklet will be available for general use of the public outside of the applicant's trading hours, which includes both the restaurant and the butcher shop, I believe. I was just wondering, so my question is around that. Is there some incongruency, or just trying to understand why there seems to be some sort of differences there of either expectations or what's been stated in the reporting?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, so the applicant applied for the parklet with the intent of having exclusive use during the restaurant trading hours. However, in light of feedback that was received during the submission period, the City has recommended that condition 1G to ensure that the applicant does not have exclusive use of that area. So in reality, and similar to other alfresco dining areas that are open to the public as well, in all likelihood, the people that occupy that space would be patrons of the business, but there would be no legal mechanism with that condition imposed to otherwise prevent people sitting in that space that aren't necessarily patrons of the business.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions for the administration on this item? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm quite aware of the economic development that we're actually trying to achieve with regard to businesses and occupants in the city. I'm also quite aware that the local residents, so South Perth, Mill Point Ward, did also have a significant disapproval of this, not overwhelming, but significant disapproval. I'm just wondering, is there going to be a more strategic review undertaken with regard to parklets across the city, as opposed to isolated single parklets, as in this instance?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the intent in the policy that I mentioned earlier would be to include locational criteria. And so that can relate to things like access to public transport or the speed of the road, proximity to certain land uses or commercial businesses. It may be the case that they're only provided for in 40km/h signposted streets, or only adjacent to local centres and the like. So we can consider locational criteria in that policy for Council's consideration.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Director Shaw. Are there any other parklets that we are considering at this point in time, and if so, whereabouts might they be located?
Ms Shaw.
I think you know there are no other applications.
Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Director Shaw. With regard to fees and charges, do we have an opportunity with regard to the mid-year review of actually including fees and charges with regard to not only this but other instances where we actually need to actually identify, change or increase a fee and charge?
Ms Shaw or Mr Bradford? Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is open for council to consider them. However, it does require an absolute majority of council and to advertise the fees and charges.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.1, Sport Spaces Investigation Feasibility Study, Sir James Mitchell Park, South Perth, Elm Street End. The purpose of this report is to consider a budget allocation for a feasibility study to investigate the use and development of a portion of Sir James Mitchell Park, the Elm Street End, for shared sports spaces. In summary, Wesley College is prepared to make a financial contribution of up to $1.5 million towards development of the sports spaces at the site, including a 50% financial contribution towards the proposed feasibility study. Development of the site for sports spaces will provide for use by Wesley College and the public, and development for sports spaces at this site is consistent with the South Perth Foreshore Management and Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you. The Sir James Mitchell Parkland area earmarked for the proposed investigation and feasibility study is, I understand it, resumed land from the Crown, designated freehold land to the city and zoned recreation for its use. I understand the overarching guiding document for the use of this land is the WAPC's DC Policy 5.3. And in line with that policy, the land use, the evidence is required in terms of that land use of community need for the proposed facility in the proposed location, also community support for the proposal, and the proposal being consistent with existing land use. In the absence of any needs analysis for this specific proposal or stakeholder engagement, except with a single school, does the city believe all these requirements to be or can be met during this prior to and during this feasibility study if it's approved?
Ms Shaw, can I direct that one your way?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So you're correct. The applicable policy is DC 5.3, which is use of reserved land. The land itself is reserved for parks and recreation under the Metropolitan Region Scheme, and the whole of the site is contained in the Swan Canning Development Control Area, which requires, if it was to be developed for any particular purpose in future, would require the Minister for Environment to consider and support the application. In terms of what that land can actually be used for, in addition to passive recreation and sports spaces, the DC provides for approval for cultural and community uses, so places of worship and the like. Community education and environment facilities could be constructed there. Uses that are compatible with parks and recreation reservations. So that can include car parks, decked car park structures, cafes, restaurant, and other specific facilities that the WAPC may consider to be compatible and appropriate. So it's not just available for potentially sports spaces itself, but other incidental or related community infrastructure. In terms of the needs analysis that's been undertaken to date, the city actually already has a community recreation and facilities strategy. That document itself demonstrates that there is growing demand for sports spaces throughout the city. And that's not just an issue for the City of South Perth, that is especially in inner city local governments as infill development occurs. So we are seeing demand for sports spaces and associated community infrastructure for those spaces.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Vard, I thought I saw your hand go up there.
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. With the reconsideration of Elm Street, the city has accelerated an intended comprehensive review of all the city's potential sporting locations. The city had already indicated a review of all possible locations for organised sport is needed, and demand will only increase as housing density increases. Could the city therefore consider an Elm Street review as a first component in the wider review it plans to undertake, and therefore finance this strategic responsibility alone to ensure no outcome expectations are inadvertently generated by accepting contributions from any interested party across our city?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the Community Recreation Facilities Plan that I mentioned earlier has already identified the need for sports spaces. Part of that document recognised that the city would need to spend approximately $88 million in the coming years to provide for sports spaces and associated infrastructure. In terms of whether this particular location would be ahead of other locations, that review of that plan is looking at the capacity of the existing reserves that we have in the city, and this one obviously hasn't already been developed for sports spaces, so it would add to the facilities in that respect. But Elm Street itself has already been identified through the South Perth Foreshore Strategy to be developed for sports spaces. So it's not necessarily that it's ahead, it's just consistent with the existing approved use of that reserve from a strategic perspective by the council, and a more detailed level of analysis in terms of what the potential sport usage would be and the impact that it would otherwise have on existing reserves throughout the city.
May I just ask the second half of the question because it pertains to this?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Could the same approach that I've asked about, which would be a hands-off approach in terms of other parties' funding, be applied throughout the investigation with the city seeking other sources of funding away from particular interests?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So just in terms of the funding that Wesley College has indicated that they would provide, Wesley College has indicated that they would provide up to $1.5 million towards the development of sports spaces. If there's concern from the council that that funding it should be provided at a later date or not at all by Wesley, in terms of the feasibility study, it would be open, should council want to progress the investigation, to fully fund the cost of the feasibility study itself. And any future contribution by Wesley would solely be for the actual development, depending on the outcome of the feasibility study. So that would simply mean that Wesley withholds $25,000 now and then uses that at a later time. In terms of the feasibility study and who would undertake the study, the intent would be that Wesley would make the financial contribution at this point in time for the $25,000, but the city would be wholly responsible for undertaking the actual feasibility study. So they would only be making a financial contribution as opposed to actually undertaking the feasibility study or appointing consultants to do that study. So I think that hopefully that addresses that portion of the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Shaw again. Where does Wesley College currently play the sports it is proposing to facilitate at this parkland in St James Mitchell Park, i.e. the soccer and cricket? I believe it might be Collins Oval, so I'm just double checking that. And if so, what is the plan for that oval if they then move across to the St James Mitchell Parkland? Is the intent then for that oval to be used for the Wasp Hockey Club relocation possibly?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So Wesley currently uses it depends on the sport, but they use their existing site and they have a lease agreement with the West Australian Planning Commission for Collins. We haven't entered into any further discussions with Wesley about whether they would potentially wholly relocate from Collins to this site because we don't know the outcome of the feasibility study at this point in time. Given they have the agreement with the WAPC for the use of Collins, that could arguably free up Collins for them to use that site for soccer or another purpose. But the city has no intentions of investigating that site for hockey facilities, given it is leased directly to Wesley by the WAPC. It's not under our care and control to determine what happens with Collins Oval in future.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Cridland.
My questions are to Director Shaw, and I'm just trying to understand this item. When I read page 59 of the attachments, I had got the feeling that Wesley were offering to pay $50,000 towards the feasibility study, but then I saw in the recommendation that it's the city put aside $25,000. So I was just wondering if you could clear that up.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on page 59, what they're suggesting in that last paragraph is they're aware that the estimated cost of undertaking the feasibility is $50,000, but their commitment to it would be $25,000 at this point in time.
A follow-up question is this a feasibility study as to whether or not the location is suitable for junior sport facilities, or is it a feasibility study as to whether or not it would be suitable for Wesley to have sporting facilities there?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a feasibility study to determine what works would otherwise be required to use the site for sports spaces. So, for example, potential drainage infrastructure that would otherwise be required, any fill that would be required. So the intent is to investigate at what cost it would take to develop this site for sports spaces for use of both Wesley and the community.
Thank you, Ms Shaw.
One last question.
Of course.
I did read the report, it's very good, and it noted the need for additional junior sporting facilities, making reference to the South Perth Junior Cricket Club, for example, playing in other towns, and I know that because my daughter's cricket team in South Perth Junior Cricket Club has been moved to Vic Park because there's not enough fields. I'm wondering, and I don't know about winter sports exactly all the times, but what would be the public benefit if the proposal by Wesley is that any such sporting field that played cricket in the summer term they would have exclusive use during the only time that junior cricket is played by the South Perth Junior Cricket Club in its competition, which is Saturday mornings.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you. So the city hasn't actually approached our other clubs within the community to see what the use would be at this point in time, given we're only at the early stages in terms of potential feasibility study. But to give you an indication, outside of cricket, there are a number of sports that are not currently catered for within the city. So, for example, we often receive requests for AFL 9s and we have no place for them at the moment. In terms of South Perth United Soccer Club, they're seeing a growth in their sport, particularly from girls. I used to play myself. I can tell you the girls typically train from 8:30 onwards, so outside of the times provided for by Wesley. I think we already know that there is demand for spaces, whether that be match games. It's not necessarily the case. It may be overflow for training, but at the very least, the intent would be to develop that area to the extent that it can be used rather than subject to inundation and not usable for sports spaces at all.
Thank you, Ms Shaw.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillor Choi.
Thank you again through the chair to Director Shaw. What impact does this proposed investigation and feasibility study have on the Challenger Reserve Master Plan in terms of the sports facilities proposed, i.e. for soccer and cricket?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similar response to the last question. We haven't engaged with the different sporting clubs at this point in time to determine what potential usage they may seek if this was to be developed.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it will become clear as a consequence of an investigation into the Sir James Mitchell Park, Elm Street area. It appears there is likely to be a substantial cost involved in converting the space to all-year organised sport. What might the city expect in terms of timeframes involved for that sort of process, and what would be the likely costs the city would have to incur?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's actually too early to answer that question. We would need the results of the feasibility study to determine what cost of the development of that space. It would depend on the outcomes of geotechnical investigations for the most part.
Councillors, just a gentle reminder that the standing orders require that questions be brief and concise and that they don't contain any expression of opinion or statement of facts. Is there anyone else that has any further questions? Councillor Choi, perhaps one more, and then other questions can be offline.
Yes. Taking learnings from past decisions, such as the WASP feasibility study, and for good fiscal governance, what does the city consider would be a reasonable time frame for the feasibility study, and can the city include a report back date to council in their recommendation?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We would need to engage the consultants. So in the first instance, if council was to resolve to go ahead with the officer's recommendation, the funds would need to be first made available in the mid-year budget review, which typically occurs around February, March. Once the funds are available, we would need to engage consultants, and so we would need to see their availability, but we would expect a feasibility study to be completed towards the end of 2024.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Mr Bradford?
And just to add to that, one of the lessons learnt from the WASP feasibility study was that the city made a financial contribution and WASP's carried out that feasibility study. Actually, what we're doing is the city is doing the study.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any further questions for the administration? Councillor Sousa.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a bit more of a practical one, I guess. Would the feasibility study include site analysis on like a geotech report or geotech studies? Because concerns have been raised about the site. I don't know whether they're valid or not, but would that be something contained within the scope of the report?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Absolutely. It would be geotechnical, environmental studies, financial impact, community and stakeholder engagement. That would also be part of that as well. So we would do up a detailed scope to determine the actual impacts, but geotechnical reports and any hydrological studies in terms of drainage would be the key focus.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Given the conversation we've had this evening with regard to the complexity and also the water logging on that land, is $50,000 still a reasonable amount to undertake this feasibility study, just to make sure that we've actually got it right?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I believe it is, based on previous cost estimates I've had for other similar reports. The actual cost to undertake any works as a result of the outcome of the feasibility study, that's unknown at this point in time. And I think that would be the determining factor on whether this site is actually suitable. But until we have the results of a feasibility study, we can't provide an indication of what that would likely be.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Director Shaw. Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the hours of use that have been indicated by Wesley College, one of the concerns is that a lot of those hours may very well impact juniors playing sport and recreating, because sort of that peak time, I'm mindful that adults would be, maybe after hours or after work hours. So what I'm concerned about is, have we had any consultation at all with any of the likely sporting clubs or associations that may very well want to be using that area at any time during the year in those prime times?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, we haven't at this point in time, and that would be undertaken as part of any stakeholder and community engagement.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Director Shaw again. Final question, with regard to the strategic review that we put on hold for the last few years for Challenge Reserve and to some extent George Burnett as well, is this going to form part of our overall strategic review when it does actually come up?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I assume you're referring to the Community Recreation Facility Study? Yes, it would. So all of the elements contained within the master plan that was prepared at that point in time would be factored into whether they're appropriate based on current demand, future demand, and just asset renewal in general and what's actually required.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions on this item this evening? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.2, South Perth Activity Centre Plan Community Benefit Contribution Framework Annual Review. The purpose of this report is for Council to note the annual review of the South Perth Activity Centre Plan Community Benefit Contribution Framework.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.3, Proposed Use Not Listed, Short-Term Accommodation, Lot 1, Unit 1, 31 Banksia Terrace, Kensington. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a use not listed, that is short-term accommodation, at Lot 1, Unit 1, 31 Banksia Terrace, Kensington. This item is referred to Council as the proposed land use not listed under the Town Planning Scheme 6, is a use not listed under Town Planning Scheme 6 and therefore falls outside the delegation to officers. For reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.1, Tender 8 of 2023, Golf Course Management Services for Collier Golf Park Golf Course. This report requests Council to consider the officer recommendation made in respect to the submissions received from the advertising of Tender 8 of 2023, provision of golf course management services, including facility redevelopment and improvements for Collier Park Golf Course. The report outlines the process undertaken and the evaluation results of the tender process. The recommendation made by officers is believed to provide the best overall outcome for the city and its ratepayers with regard to the long-term future use of Collier Park Golf Course. I just note that there is a confidential attachment to this, and any questions that relate to or go into areas relating to the confidential attachment should be asked behind closed doors.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on the open material? Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you. Just in regards to the deputation made this evening by Mr Scott, is the city able to respond to the concerns about a risk to a change of operator in the long term?
Sure, I think I'm best placed to deal with that one, given Director Adams is actually away with a medical appointment this evening. The issues to do with sale of an operator, normally under a contract and a lease and a contract, there are provisions for change of operator and arrangements there. The city is able to scrutinise that process, so I don't believe that's a concern. With regard to insolvency, there are also provisions on dealing with that in the event that were to occur. These are normal contract provisions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you through the chair to CEO Bradford. And just in relation to, I think the other concern that was raised was a potential risk to, price gouging, type practices, increase costs to golfers that might negatively impact the golf course in the long term, which the city may not have control over during this lease.
Mr Bradford.
I might get Mr Lecoq to confirm this, but in short, Club Links have been operating the golf course since 2018 successfully, with prices that have been approved by Council. In the most recent budget, Council also approved more flexibility for Club Links to set prices. That's now been implemented. A couple of observations I would make are that the golf course is a commercial operation. We run it in order to derive a return for the city. More than 80% of the people who use the golf course are not residents of the city, and so it needs to make a commercial return. Having said that, any operator is going to be sensitive to making sure that they can attract customers and then price the product accordingly. My observation, given that the golf course operates at really, really high occupancy, is that we're meeting the market now, and I would expect that to continue. And I would expect that there will be some level of scrutiny of the future fees by the city and council as well. Is that correct?
Mr Lecoq, anything to add?
Through the Mayor, the only bit of information that I would like to add there is that you may recall that through the budget process, we set the fees and charges and the parameters for those fees and charges subject to certain conditions under which the operator need to operate in. So in other words, there's a structure for fees and charges being set, and those fees and charges also had conditions that apply to them, that apply to certain community groups and individuals in the community, etc. So that's clearly laid out through our budget process.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. And Mr Bradford?
Just to touch another element that I guess relates to pricing is accessing by social clubs for tea times. Clearly, the social clubs are an important stakeholder in the golf course. In the way that they have currently been accommodated, I see no reason why that wouldn't continue into the future. And the specific example of not being able to get their normal tea time because of some, I wouldn't think that would occur.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, through the chair, to CEO Bradford and Mr Lecoq. Just in relation to the tender, also including facility redevelopment and improvement for Collier Park Golf Course, can the city just touch on what the community consultation down the track might look like?
Mr Bradford, should I send that your way? All right.
I might phone a friend for help here if I need help. The current facilities at the golf course, in short, are a driving range, a food and beverage outlet, a clubhouse, and the pro shop, so a retail space. What is being proposed is effectively, while it's an upgrade, a replacement of those. So a new driving range, a new food and beverage outlet, a new clubhouse. So really it is an upgrade of similar facilities is what is proposed, but that's clearly still has to go through approval by council in terms of any budget allocations, and we would expect that there would be community consultation or stakeholder consultation as part of those processes by the city and the operator. The extent of that, I'm not certain at this stage.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Navard, I thought I saw your hand go up.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could the city please elaborate on the thinking behind offering a 21-year contract?
Mr Bradford, should I send that to you or Ms Amprimo?
I'll have a go.
All right.
So it is pretty normal in local and state government where the use of Crown land is being put under the use through the use of another third party on behalf of the owner or the operator to have a long-term lease, particularly where the operator is expected to make a significant capital contribution, which the city otherwise would have to make. And so it's necessary to provide a long-term arrangement in order for the operator to be able to operate the facility, make that capital contribution, get a return on it. It's pretty normal practice.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Another question, Councillor Navard?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. The city is able to seek long-term treasury loans, which we already have evidence of in the city's financial statements. As interest rates are likely to fall back somewhat, what would be the city's thinking on what options the city could consider in its aspect of financing Collier Park Village course?
Mr Bradford, should I send that your way?
Yeah, that's probably verging on anything that might be confidential, but I just make the point that any contribution by the city, the funding source of it is yet to be considered and would need to be considered by council if and when it was required.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Cridland.
My questions, I don't know whether they should be to Director Shaw or to you, CEO, relate to the presentation by Mr. Scott. 3 questions. One, is the mini golf profitable? Secondly...
Councillor Cridland, if it's okay with you, I might get them answered one at a time.
Okay.
Yep. Should I send that to Ms Shaw or Mr Bradford?
Mr Lecoq.
Mr Lecoq, you able to respond to Councillor Cridland's question?
I am through the chair, through Mayor. So if we take into account the prior year actual figures, the revenue generated by the mini golf was $208,000 for the whole year, and it resulted in a net profit of just shy of $200,000. Year to date, looking at the October figures, as at the end of October, the mini golf generated a profit of $70,000, and that's only up until the end of October. So the mini golf is regarded as being quite profitable at this stage.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Mr Bradford?
I think I'd add that in recent years, I think that the net profit of golf overall for the city has gone from about 400,000 to 800,000. So actually, mini golf's making a 50% contribution to that increase in profit.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Your second question, Councillor Cridland?
In the context of the original forecast that the mini golf would pay itself or be paid back within 6 years, were those forecasts based on the council approving the RAF facility and using the $20 million that it received by way of a grant from the federal government to build a fantastic facility where there would be many more people using the mini golf?
Should I send that to Mr Lecoq or to Mr Bradford?
I'd have to take that one notice, but Mr Lecoq might be able to answer it.
Mr Lecoq, you able to answer that one, or would you prefer to take that one on notice for now?
We'll take it on notice.
Thank you. And your third question, Councillor Cridland?
My third question was, in the context of the ongoing roof leak problems which have resulted in the kitchen and other facilities being regularly shut down at the golf course, is it foreseeable that, or is it reasonable rather, that simply repairing the roof is a way to make the facility continue on as a decent and reasonable facility for residents and users of the golf course?
Ms Ampremo, should I send that in your direction?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The challenge with the buildings that are there at the moment is the design of them doesn't really make it feasible to simply patch up what's there. We have looked at a number of options and a number of repairs have been made, but there needs to be extensive work to make those buildings functional, which is why we believe that there is substantial expenditure required.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Mr Bradford?
I might add that one of the things holding back the operator in terms of performance is their ability to cater for functions of either multiple functions or functions of a certain size, and that's a limitation. The kitchens are not fit for purpose.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question following on from Councillor Cridland's questions. Just with regard to mini golf, was that a revenue last year of $208,000? Was that a net profit of $208,000?
Mr Lecoq?
Through the Mayor, the revenue was $280,000. $280,000, and the net profit was just shy of $200,000 at $198,000.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Lecoq. And just with regard to clarity, so the expense would be predominantly the depreciation of the actual facility itself, is that correct?
Mr Lecoq?
Through the Mayor, that's correct.
Excellent. And then just a follow-up question. So the facility costs a couple of $1 million to construct, and it's been depreciated over roughly what time? Because that's about $80,000, which means the depreciation is probably over 20 plus years. Is that fair to say?
Mr Lecoq?
Through the Mayor, yes, that's correct. Approximately averaged at 20 years.
Okay. And just a final question. So if the depreciation is for a 20-year useful life, would we be considering a major upgrade, overhaul to freshen everything up within the next 5 years or so to make sure that it's sort of cutting edge comparable to other facilities?
Mr Lecoq, should I send that in your direction, or is that one best sent to Ms Ambremo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. There is no plan for any significant upgrade to the facility in the near future. It's still in good condition and quite functional.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Any further questions? Councillor, sorry, not Councillor, Mr Lecoq.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add to that answer from Ms. Ambremo is that it's important to understand that that's average depreciation over the whole period. So there's obviously components of it that has got shorter life cycles and longer life cycles. So elements of it would need upgrading into the future, although that's not on the immediate horizon. As you may well know, that asset is still in a very, very good condition. So what I'm trying to say is that a upgrade would be intermittent, and it would not necessarily represent a significant expenditure similar to what was the establishment cost.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. One more question, Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So just a final question following on from what you've just provided. So if we don't have any major upgrades, obviously, comparability against some of the other facilities, what they're offering would be quite different. So for our long-term financial plan, we obviously don't have any major capital works included in the long-term financial plan from what I understand. Are we factoring in any decline in revenue, given the quality of the facilities will deteriorate over the next 5 to 8 years?
Mr Lecoq?
Council may be aware that, we do not have an adopted long-term financial plan at this stage. We're doing long-term financial forecasts. Those forecasts takes into account its best possible renewal and maintenance of facilities to ensure a continuance of revenue streams.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillors, any further questions on this item this evening? That's a no. Okay. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, City of South Perth Annual Report 2022-23. This report recommends that Council accept the 22-23 Annual Report and endorses the Electors General Meeting to be held 6th of February 2024.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item this evening? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions with regard to the ratios. So current ratio from 21-22 year to 22-23 year, that has increased roughly by about a third. And also debt service cover obviously has moved significantly from 21-22 from about 11.5 to just under 4. If I could have some comments as to just the major reasons for the change in those ratios.
Mr Lecoq?
If you can give me a moment just to page to them, then I'll be able to speak to them.
Of course.
So through the Mayor, the current ratio is a result of movements in terms of the way that we recognize the long-term liabilities that relates to the movement on the recognition of the liability that is directly related to the Commonwealth grant that was initially received for the RAF, and that we've moved from a long-term liability into a current liability that's now cash-backed. So that has a significant input. And then the second question was on the debt service, and that directly relates to timing. If you consider that the previous debt service was not impacted yet by the amount owed on underground power, whereas the movement into the current period of the amount owed on the underground power affects that debt service. However, it should be noted that what the ratio does not consider is that servicing of that debt is actually funded by the contributions from people in the affected area. So therefore, it effectively means that it's a net zero impact on the city. However, the ratio is not formulated in such a manner to take that into account.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Yes, thank you, Mr Lecoq, for that response, and thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the initial application of the accounting standards, so during the year we've obviously identified that AASB 2020-6 amendments to Australian accounting standards, classification of liabilities as current or non-current, deferral of effective date. Did that have any impact on our financial statements for the 22-23 year end at all? So it's a first time application of reclassification of liabilities current or non-current.
Mr Lecoq, you able to answer that, or would you prefer to take that one on notice?
No, it didn't have an impact on our financial statements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq.
Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.3, Policy P669, Elected Member Continuing Professional Development. In accordance with Section 5.128, bracket 1, bracket A of the Local Government Act 1995, Council must review Policy P669, Elected Member Continuing Professional Development, after each ordinary election. The policy has been updated to capture recent amendments to the Local Government Act in relation to fees and expenses to be reimbursed when participating in a required course or continuing professional development.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.1, Terms of Reference, Audit Risk and Governance Committee. The terms of reference for the Audit Risk and Governance Committee are presented for consideration by the committee and referral to council for adoption.
Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.2, 2022-23 Annual Financial Statements, External Audit and Information Systems Final Reports. This report tables the 2022-23 Annual Financial Statements, Final Audit and Information Systems Audit Reports from the Office of the Auditor General, referred to as a management letter. Like prior years, the 22-23 Annual Financial Statements audit included an Information Systems audit. The final audit management letter includes 4 findings, risk ratings, recommendations and management comments. The Information System Audit Management Letter includes 20 findings, risk ratings, recommendations and management comments. It is recommended that all the findings are accepted and added to the City's Audit Register, with commentary on progress of resolution to be reported at each Audit Risk and Governance Committee meeting. Following the Audit Risk and Governance Committee meeting held on the 13th of November, the Office of the Auditor General, through their internal audit review processes, concluded that, contrary to their previous advice and position, a prior period restatement should in fact not be treated as a prior period error in the City's annual financial report. As a result of the removal of the prior period restatement, the contents of the Confidential Attachment A have been amended. Confidential Attachment B remains as presented. It should be noted that the consequential recommendations and risk ratings have not been affected and remain as is. More detail is provided at the end of the report under the heading Additional Information.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? No questions? Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.3, 2022-23 City of South Perth Annual Financial Report. This report recommends that the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee recommends that Council adopt the 2022-23 Annual Financial Report, accept the Independent Auditor's Report and the Office of the Auditor General Exit Brief. Following the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee meeting held on the 13th of November, the Office of the Auditor General, through their process, concluded that, contrary to their previous position, a prior period restatement should not be treated as a prior period error in the City's annual financial report. The City initially included this on the advice of the Audit Director to avoid a qualified audit opinion. As a result of the above-mentioned change, and one more change, Attachment A, Attachment B and Confidential Attachment C have been updated. The Officer and Audit, Risk and Governance Committee recommendations remain unchanged. More details are provided at the end of the report under the heading Additional Information.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? I might ask one just to make sure that I've understood the report correctly. So I guess this is to Mr Bradford in Mr Adams's absence. Am I correct in understanding that the Office of the Auditor General initially wanted the treatment one way, failing which the City would receive a qualified audit opinion, and has since reversed that position and gone back to the original setting?
That's correct, with a similar threat that if we don't follow the revised change.
I see, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.4, Internal Audit Report, Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework. This report tables the Internal Audit Report, Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework in accordance with the City's Strategic Internal Audit Plan 2022-23 to 2026-27. The report contains 3 detailed audit findings with a number of notations and observations. The audit includes strengths, weaknesses, ratings, issues, risk ratings, recommendations and management comments.
Thank you. Any questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.5, Policy Review. The terms of reference of the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee include responsibility for reviewing the City's policies. A number of policies are now presented for consideration of the Committee and referral to Council for adoption.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a few questions here. The first one is in relation to the amended policy P110, supportive community and supporting groups. This appears to be like quite a major policy change, and given the limited reporting in the agenda, I'm just wondering if there can be some sort of background explanation provided as to the reasons for this major policy change, and also is it in any way connected to the previous item on the Sports Spaces Investigation Feasibility Study, please?
Now, officers, I note that Mr Adams is absent this evening. Does anyone want to have a crack at that, or should the question be taken on notice? Ms Shaw, you able to assist us there?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can advise that it's not connected to the previous item on sports spaces, but if I can, I will take it on notice just to provide some detailed commentary about the changes.
Thank you. Councillor Choi, a second question?
Yes, thank you, through the Chair, Director Shaw. The next query I have is in relation to the amended policy P104 Community Awards. I see that there's been an insertion proposed for a high school scholarship award. I'm just wondering when the city's ratepayers, started funding these type of fees, and also what would be the maximum amount that the city would pay? Is there a maximum amount? Like if it's a private school, yeah, it's quite hefty. Could be 25,000 plus.
Ms Shaw?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So the High School Scholarship Awards is $1,000. It's awarded to Year 10 students moving on to Year 11 within each high school within the district, whether that be a public or a private school.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi, did you have a third question?
Yeah, so just in relation to that then, thank you again through the chair to Director Shaw. Perhaps that could be written in there because it's no amount, I believe, written in the amended policy, which is why I'm thinking it's for a whole year.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, that can be amended by council. However, the reason that it wasn't prescribed within there is that it was subject to budget allocation each financial year. So it would effectively be up to the council of the day to determine what the appropriate amount could be.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
Yeah, sorry, just my final question in relation to policy P107, access and inclusion, the proposed amendments there. I'm just a bit curious as to why the city is removing all reference to disability in their policies and plans, given that people living with a disability in our community are the most vulnerable in society. And I'm just seeing like through the AIP, which I know, the Access Inclusion Plan, which I know the council's already endorsed, and I did raise a query about that at that time as well. And now we've got this policy, which I believe is sort of going into line with that plan. It's just that it seems to be removing all reference to disability. I'm just a bit curious about that, and if there could be some sort of explanation around that provided, please.
Councillors, just one more gentle reminder that questions are required to be brief and concise, and they're not to be accompanied with any expression of opinion or statement of fact. Ms Shaw, should I send that one your way?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My understanding is that that's the current accepted terminology from the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. And the reason it was changed is to not identify certain people with disabilities, rather to provide for access and inclusion for all members of the community.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.6, Audit Register Progress Report, Q1. This report provides an update on the progress of actions included in the Audit Register. The Audit Register includes all open audit findings that have previously been accepted by the Audit Risk and Governance Committee and Council.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Any questions on this item, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. That's nil for this evening. Item 15 is ordinarily when we would close the meeting to the public, but there is no reason to do that this evening. And that brings us to item 16, which is closure. So before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation this evening. I declare the meeting closed at 7:47 p.m. Thank you all and good night.